peace, peace. What's up, black people? It's your girl. Welcome to Yemimah's World, the Djelimusa's Cafe. I am your host, Yemimah. It's a Saturday evening, and I am sitting here, and I just finished watching an episode of Good Times, and so I wanted to come on really quick while it was still fresh in my head. So the episode that I watched, it wasn't that bullcrap remake crap. It was the original Good Times. The episode that I watched was the one with Robert Guillaume in it. If you remember, he used to play Benson, and one of my favorite actors. And he was the neighborhood drunk in this episode. I know, right? We thought Ned the Wino was the only one, but he wasn't. And his character was named Fishbone. And Fishbone, they thought that he had got hit by a car and had died, but actually someone else got hit. But the community rallied around and decided to give Fishbone this a funeral. And so since it wasn't Fishbone that got hit, Robert Guillaume's character, Fishbone, he decided he would dress up as a woman and go to his own funeral. And so he's there, and people are wondering who this mysterious woman is because his face is covered with a black veil and this, that, and the other. So they're giving Fishbone his last rites. And Wanda, if you remember the character Wanda used to cry at the drop of a hat. No matter what happened, she would always just burst into tears and just start wailing. And so at the funeral, she does her thing. She's wailing, she's crying. But the message gets so good to Fishbone that he he starts wailing and crying as well. And Wanda stands up and she looks at him and she's like mad because that's her job to cry at the funerals. And so she's like, you get your own funeral. This one's mine. And of course, at the end, it's revealed that the woman is actually Fishbone, and they're all glad that he's, not dead. But the minister comes over to Wanda, or the funeral director comes over to Wanda, and he's like, I have another funeral at 2:00. Can you come? Because her wailing has evoked emotions in other people at the funeral who maybe wouldn't have had those emotions if someone else hadn't started wailing at the beginning. So she agrees and said, yeah, I'll come. So I'm looking at this and I'm starting to remember something that I read some years ago. And I'm wondering if I read it, if I remember reading it, was it a Mandela effect or what? So I look it up. And this segment is called We Are Our Ancestors. So I look up wailing women in Africa. And it takes me to Kemet. Now, of course, Google takes me to Egypt, but I prefer to call it Kemet because when this information was talked about, it refers to it as ancient Egypt, and we know there is no such thing as ancient Egypt. It is called Kemet before the cloud critters changed the name. But they had women wailers at funerals. They would have women to come in and professionally cry at these funerals to evoke emotions from people so that they can mourn properly for the dead. Now, they never had the men to do it because, of course, men were mighty and strong and they didn't show emotions. But these women would come in and they would actually cry. They would pay them to come in and cry at the funeral. And so I was thinking, I was like, wow, back in the day, when the Black church was truly the Black church, before it was colonized, integrated, and had the input of the Western world, when we were truly a Black church, we did a lot of things the way our ancestors did in Africa. And so we have these wailing women that come down from, I guess, the Nile Valley, because we're talking about Kemet, we're talking about the Nile Valley. So I'm looking at Wanda doing this, and after reading the information, I'm like, she was just basically walking in her ancestors' footsteps. Then I started to wonder, like, oh, wait a minute, did the writers of this episode know anything about the wailing women in Africa? So I went back and I just Googled wailing women. And I didn't say anything about Africa, just wailing women. And it took me straight to the Bible, to what is called the Old Testament. Now we know who the authors are of the Old Testament. And in, I think it's Jeremiah, book book 9, I think. I can't remember. Chapter 9, yeah, it's Jeremiah chapter 9, verse 17 through 20. And in the verse, God is telling Jeremiah to call forth the wailing women to cry and to mourn for what he's about to unleash on his people for being hard-headed. And so I'm thinking, I said, now wait a minute, because 90% of the Bible, especially the Old Testament, takes place in Africa or there around that area. And so these wailing women that he was calling forth had to be African women, because they hadn't gone over to Greece and Rome and those places as of yet, not till we get to the New Testament. So all this took place with black folk. And we know it had to be black women because, again, they were in Africa. So back in the day, the old churches used to have a mourning bench, mourning, a mourning bench, where the women would sit on that bench and would mourn for whatever they had to mourn for, whether it was somebody who was deceased, whether it was something that was going on in the country, whether it was something that going on in the community, somebody's health. They sat on the mourning bench and they would mourn. That is something that our ancestors used to do. We don't have the mourning bench anymore that I know of in churches. If you're a black church and you still have one, please contact me, send me an email, let me know, because we don't, and we have so much more now to mourn for our black communities than we did when they had the mourning bench. Now there was a lot to mourn for, of course, back then, but we still have a lot to do. But I was just really, really, because I realized that the writers of this episode would have to know something about this. To have Wanda in that, they would have to know something about black funerals and black women that mourn. And I'm so convinced that they had ghostwriters that they probably paid black writers under the table or had them as ghostwriters, because those two white men really don't know a lot about the black experience. Not enough to write about it. Not things like that, things that are so personal and private to us. They would have had to have ghostwriters. But then I thought about the fact that they wrote about it in their holy scripts about the wailing women. And again, they had to be black because they were in Africa. They know more about our history than we do. And the only reason we know about the wailing women, and we would be quick to say, oh, yeah, well, that's biblical for women to sit on the mourning bench. It's biblical because they stole it from the holy writings of Africa. So before it was biblical, it was African spirituality. I'm just saying, before it was biblical, it was African spirituality. And we would take pride in saying, oh, well, that's in the Bible. Yeah, well, where did the Bible get it from? But yeah, go back and look at that episode. And you will see the character of Wanda walking in the footsteps of our ancestors all the way back to Kemet, back to the Nile Valley, where they had professional mourners. We know they don't do it at white funerals because white funerals don't last long. I used to work with a guy a long time ago. He was the manager of the department that I worked in at a company, and his father died, and he went and buried his father on his lunch break and came back to work. And I've seen that happen before where people will take their lunch break and go, to a funeral and of a loved one. I mean, of a mother, father, sister, brother. It didn't matter. But we know that with black funerals, they go for a while. They last a couple of hours, and the crying and the wailing and the moaning that you hear from black women, it's it's sacred and it's spiritual. And I don't believe that Kemet is the only country in Africa that have these wailing women. I have to look it up because I remember reading another country where another nation of people in Africa have the wailing women. So yeah, look it up. So all right, so that's it. I just wanted to come on real quick and just talk about that because I just found it fascinating that how we are our ancestors, whether you want to be or not. We are our ancestors. Till next time, stay black, stay safe, and I'll be black again with another episode of Yemimah's World. Peace.